Okay everyone, just a quick video on all of the brake options for a C5 and C6 Corvette. There is quite a bit that goes into the brake stuff that we've developed for these cars, and I'm going to start from the simplest in the beginning. An inline master cylinder on our C5, C6 bolt-in handbrake assembly. The way that this works is it goes onto the center console, and these holes line up with either the C6 or the C5 transmission tunnel. The shifter sits in between, and we have this threaded rod that has two options for the holes. The closer hole is for the C5, the further one is for the C6. This puts the master cylinder and the handle between the shifter and the steering wheel. The master cylinder sits up and under the dashboard, and you are able to just fit the cap on and off so that you can fill the reservoir. For me, this was the best location for this, and I designed this a few years ago, where the only other option was on the outside of the shifter, putting it a good 8-10 inches away from the steering wheel. It was a bit awkward to transition from your wheel to the handbrake to the shifter. It was kind of an unorthodox way of driving, so putting it here was great. We've sold a ton of these and they work amazing. It's all high strength alloy steel. You might think that there's not much here holding it, but it's ridiculously strong. So that is what you're gonna need to mount either the inline or the reservoir. The reservoir being for any dual caliper setup, the inline being for just your stock calipers. We all know how the brake lines work for both inline and dual caliper, so we're not gonna really talk about the brake lines. We're mostly gonna talk about the options that we have that are not fully understood, which is basically the difference between these two brackets. Now, a Corvette has 3 versions of brakes, actually 4, but we won't talk about the ZR1 because I don't think anyone's drifting a ZR1. So we need to talk about the base model, we need to talk about the Z51, and then the Z06 Grand Sport. The differences between these 3 options are the size of their caliper and the size of the rotor. For our kit, in order for this caliper to fit onto the knuckle, the stock knuckle, it was not able to fit with any other rotor other than the Z06 and the Grand Sport rotor, because that rotor is much larger. And because of how large it is, we were able to space this caliper enough that these just clear on the knuckle. The reason we're using this caliper is because it's a 4-piston, 1 3/8 bore Wilwood caliper with a ton of biting force when you pull the handbrake. So you should be able to lock up your car with 2 fingers, and if you can't, then you need to resize the caliper or resize the master cylinder. That's kind of the rule of thumb. You do not want to be pulling this, bending things, breaking things, and overexerting yourself. It should not be that hard, but this caliper proved challenging to mount to the stock knuckle. Moving on to the bracket options. This bracket uses a factory caliper, either a Grand Sport or a Z06 caliper, and it uses a Wilwood caliper as your handbrake. Using these 3/8 bolts, which is standard sizing for Wilwood calipers, you can bolt this on and it'll fit with the stock Z06 or Grand Sport rotor. You cannot run the base model or the Z51 calipers with this kit. This kit can only be used with the Grand Sport Z06. Now, this is probably one of the most frequently problematic combos that we've run into. Customers are buying this bracket because it's cheaper than the other one, not realizing that the Grand Sport Z06 caliper and rotor are required, and those are also kind of hard to buy and find. My recommendation, do not buy this option if you don't already have a Z06 or a Grand Sport Corvette, because you will then have to source those, and they're going to be expensive, hard to get, and you would be better off using what our alternative option is, the dual Wilwood brake assembly, dual caliper bracket. It uses a Wilwood on both the foot brake and the handbrake. And on the foot brake, the only thing you need to run the caliper is something that comes with the kit, and it's an M10 to a -3 brake line adapter, because all of the Wilwood stuff uses -3 lines and 1/8 NPTs, and it's all Imperial and kind of standard for your aftermarket brake line stuff, but the OEM stuff is all metric. So the kit comes with that conversion in order for you to run this setup. Now, this setup uses only the Grand Sport or Z06 rotor. The rotor is easier to find than the calipers because rotors are considered consumables. Consumables are something that wear often and need to be replaced often, so people are regularly making them, companies. So when you buy this bracket, you're gonna have the same caliper on the foot brake and the handbrake with the adapter. The bore sizing is almost identical to the stock caliper, so there won't be much difference with your brake setup, with your master cylinder and your foot brake. The other thing that some guys may not recognize is that you need to cut the tie rod mount off of the knuckle in order to fit this bracket. We have had the question of why did you do that on the design? The reason is because where this caliper needs to sit, like this, the caliper actually would have run into the toe arm pickup. Otherwise, the caliper would not fit in that location, so we needed to cut off the toe arm mount to get the correct location for the tie rod. Now, this isn't a bad thing because OEM tie rods are not that common anymore. They actually don't make them anymore. You need to buy like a Silverado tie rod or something. If you use our tie rod assembly, it gives you a new double shear mount that has bump steer adjustment, so you can fine tune this in. It's much stronger than the factory one. The factory one can twist or break off in the event of a rear wheel hit, which is super common on a Corvette because the rear end is so short. So this is an improvement for both strength, caliper mounting position, and bump steer correction. You can adjust it easily. Those are all the reasons why this bracket looks the way it does, and it kind of incorporates the toe arm mount with it. There are other options available for dual caliper brackets on a Corvette, but they are not recommended to be used for drift cars that are with high grip or grippy tires because the caliper itself isn't that big. We could have fit a smaller caliper in this location and avoided having to do this modification, but we really wanted to fit the 4-piston Willwood so that we have the most bite force possible. So to finish off, I'm going to give you my recommendations for the level of driving that you are at and what you should get for your Corvette. First off, you're going to need this regardless, whether you're going to run inline or reservoir, you still will need this. This is going to be the first thing you get. If you're running a very standard style Corvette, you don't drift it very often and you just want something simple, I would recommend doing the inline setup with the inline master cylinder. This is going to give you some weird feedback through the pedals. It may disrupt your driving style if you handbrake and foot brake at the same time, but if you're just starting, it's not going to break the bank. It's going to get the job done with the stock calipers that are already there. It's minimal effort and you can upgrade it all later. If you are running a C6 Grand Sport or Z06, my recommendation would be to go with this bracket. Because you already have the stock foot brake caliper that works, this is going to save you some money and works just as well as the other setups. This setup is good to go all the way up to Pro, and it's going to do exactly what you need it to with the best tires in the game. If you have a base model or a Z51, which most of us have, this is going to be the option that's best. This is going to give you the 2 Willwood calipers, and again, this is going to take you all the way to the top with that chassis and make it just as good as the Grand Sport or the Z06. You can get these products from us or from Drift HQ, including the brake line kits that are universal to allow you to install this kit, and we'll see you guys on the next video.